All right, everybody. We'll let everybody get in here just a minute or two. We'll get started. Thank you all for jumping on. It's going to be quite the show. All right. What time is it? We'll just get rocking and rolling here. So thank you, everybody, for joining Q Loves You, coming to you live. Mindful Mondays. Going to be another show. We've been doing this now for a few weeks, and the evolution is continuing. Another week, what else can I say? And that's what I was kind of putting on all the flyers. We've got plenty to talk about. But I think right off the bat, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce everybody, but something different we're going to try. If you're out there watching later on tonight, probably about an hour in, we're going to take a couple comments / questions and maybe see what we can get into just for about 15-20 minutes. So just keep that in mind as you're going through it. We'll try to answer some comments as we're watching this. But again, probably around an hour after thereabouts, we'll start answering some questions towards the back end. So keep that in mind. But for now, again, thank you all. My typical host for the night, my good buddy Patrick Ney, is off this evening. He's up camping, holidays, big surprise, making it right. It's beautiful, 4th of July. I wish I was there with them, but we're here. So I'm actually happy to be here more, if that makes any sense. I am going to unmute everybody and introduce everyone here. So let's go at it. We've got on the screen, say hello, everybody. We've got Ernie DeSilva as say what's up, Ern. And you've been here a couple times. Everybody knows him, I think, now by now. Yes?
What's up, peoples? How are you? What is up, Facebook world? Mad love and all that good stuff. And, let's just get into it.
All right. And we've got, of course, Ernie's a brilliant artist, actor, writer. Love him. I give you all the props. And I've got our good buddy here. I'll say philosopher extraordinaire, Mr. Joe Estrella.
Joe,
how you doing out there? Hopefully we can get to some of those questions today.
Yes. We'll get down there about an hour in, like I said. So, and then we've got new to the program. Had an amazing conversation with this wonderful woman for about an hour and a half the other night. It was really great. Community activist, former business owner, brilliant. Maisha Morales. Hello.
Hey, hi everyone.
Hi. So, we're gonna get rolling into this pretty quickly. I know Joe and for those that have watched, Joe and Ern have been on a little bit, but I'd like to start off with Maisha, and of course, ladies first. We'll go down that route. But Maisha, so after we talked a little bit, you were activist, you're former business owner. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of background, and then I'll kind of go into what the one thing that we wanted to talk about here after.
So a little background on
just a little background on what where you're from, what you do, just a little bit.
So I am born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Also of Puerto Rican descent. I've basically been organizing, I want to say all my life, probably since, schoolyard days when I used to go after the bullies. But basically, so but when I really got heavy into it was in 2007. When I was displaced due to a 2004 rezoning in downtown Brooklyn that displaced hundreds of small businesses. And that kind of sparked my organizing around small businesses. And from there, getting involved with neighborhood groups, one specific one, Fury Families United for Racial and Economic Equality, to work around changing policy that have direct negative impacts on communities of color. And since then, that's kind of what I've been into. Wherever I can support, because this movement work it's a lot. We have a lot of issues going on. And so whether it's political prisoner work or, working around housing justice work, health justice, environmental justice, Maisha's there, right? And in whatever way, sometimes it may be even just donating to an organization,
sure,
which is very important. that we donate to the struggle, because this work is a lot, and um, unfortunately, some of this work needs to be funded.
Well,
so
I tell you, there's two things. Sorry to cut you, but there's two things that I want to bring up that you did, and certainly so people can understand what you did in your business. Well, first of all, let's talk about a little bit. You were 9/11.
right.
Is an interesting thing I want to bring up for everybody, and kind of a little background about how that story and how you kind of kicked back into gear there. And now you were working in the Twin Towers. You
Yes.
had been. You
Right.
were. There were layoffs going on, and you were
right.
You were let go the day before, along with
Right.
99 other people.
The company I worked for at that time was a few blocks away from the World Trade Center, but we had conference rooms at the World Trade Center. And so my job in the morning was to kind of go in, set up, making sure things were running properly for meetings, whether they be catering events, making sure the caterers are in. That the day before I was let go, 99 of us were let go that day. And what I thought was the worst day of my life, losing my job, knowing I had a child to support, rent to pay, the next morning turned out to be a blessing, right? When I woke up and saw what had happened. And so through that kind of like, one of the things that really sometimes are negative in life, I think that was one of the wake up calls. I really believe in like looking at any negative thing that happens in life and finding a positive. For me, I believe there's a positive somewhere in there. Me losing my job, the positive was I was alive the next day.
Well, we talk about, I mean, it all flows together, I believe, negative,
right.
positive, negative, without the
right.
other, whatever it is, right?
And through that, I was able to, I had my former employer, turns out he was closing down his business. I reached out to him. He basically gave me the business for the same amount of my tax return. I built the business, started with nothing, just whatever little inventory that was left, and put right back into it. And through that, became successful, right? And I was able to, one of the things that I was passionate about was hiring locally. So the business that I owned was located 4 blocks from where I lived, right? It was in the same community I lived. My money went back into the community, down to the people that I hired were people from the community, people what society considers the unhireable, whether they be formerly incarcerated, people who maybe didn't have,
a chance anywhere else.
Right. And then I also believed in paying livable wages, right? So like, hey, you're going to get paid this salary plus commission. So when you add that in total, that is definitely, especially for those times, above what even today is considered livable wage. In return, they had to do something to kind of, because couldn't stay with me forever. One, I didn't know how long my business was going to last. Two, I wanted to give opportunities to others, right? And so
you made them work part-time, I think you said. Yeah, was
right.
everybody
Part-time, basically, part-time on, and the other part-time they had to like focus, whether it be go back to school or something to better themselves so that they can eventually move on. A few of them wound up owning their own businesses or getting jobs and finishing their education, getting jobs, city jobs, government jobs. And so, it was definitely a positive impact that I was having in the community. So when Mayor Bloomberg basically gave away the property to luxury developers, gave the okay, it didn't only impact me or my child, but it impacted my community, right? And that's when I got involved in like seriously organizing other small business owners. A lot of them were scared to speak. A lot of them were immigrant small business owners who were scared to speak because in the countries they come from, you don't speak against the government, right? So I kind of helped I led that fight with other small business owners. Unfortunately, powers that be get involved to kind of separate and destroy use their tactics to disband groups that are organizing. I think that's kind of what happened. Towards the end, basically, they were bought out to stop organizing with me.
Sure.
I still look at it as a positive because I say, well, I didn't get anything, but they got the monies that they needed to start businesses other places.
Right. They wouldn't have got that otherwise.
Right. They wouldn't have. So
Right.
I figured we won anyway. Right. So there's that. With that, I got involved with, I basically went from being a successful small business owner, really building, to losing everything, right? To the point where I lived off my savings and I couldn't find a job. Through that, because I had always been organizing, I was offered a job. I was asked to apply for a job in the Lower East Side for a housing organization, but organizing with seniors, unhealthy aging. That was definitely an honor to work with the senior population, especially in the Lower East Side. Amazing community, artist, activist community, historically, immigrant community. So that was really great. And I've just been involved in so many other things where I tend to focus more on affordable housing. So that's basically what I do. But like I said, I support whatever causes I can because they're all part of the same issue, right?
Sure.
And the impacts, right? And a lot of it's systematic racism and oppression that create all of this. And so,
and what's your ethnicity is what?
I'm Puerto Rican.
Puerto Rican. So yeah. you have a ton of knowledge in terms of what is actually, I mean, not only what's happening in the States and obviously in Puerto Rico as well, right? I mean, everything that's going on and how the treatment of that and how that still kind of falls in the same line of what's
right.
Going on,
I mean,
right?
We're talking about a colonized. I know some people don't consider it a country. For me, it's its own country, but we are a colonized country where, and what's unfortunate, and it's funny because we were talking about this, it even impacts the way some of our people think, right? That colonized mentality.
Right.
And that's something that I struggle with all the time, especially working with some of, and I don't know if Joe and Ernie have experienced this, just some of the ways that our people think, not just Puerto Ricans, right? But there are a lot of people of color who, unfortunately, they also have this mentality of, and that's not for everyone, but well, you had to have done something or you deserved it, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're spewing the same, black on black crime lingo, that BS, or just unfortunately looking down at other people of color, and even their own people, right? So there's a lot of that. So those are things I battle with, even with when it comes to I think dealing with other comrades that I have, people that I love, that I grew up with, that happen to be white, right? And knowing them and growing up with them and genuinely knowing that overall they're good people, but you start to hear, these are things that I've been trying to work on, right? Because you start to hear little things like, well, reverse racism, or I've experienced racism. Black people or Latino people can be racist too. So that's kind of some of the things I've been working on is how do I educate my own folks, right? To inform them on how some of their ways of thinking are, there is prejudice in them.
Well, and that's exactly what we talked about before, the difference. And that's something we're going to spark on right now, like prejudice during racist versus racism.
Right. And then I think the other part is, even with some of people in my own family, right? Or that are, have married white people and hearing things like, well, Black people, I've experienced racism from Black people. No, you have not, right? You can say you have experienced racial discrimination, maybe, but there is no way you've experienced, if you're a white person, you've experienced racism, right? Because what is attached to that is institution, right? It's institutional power, right? minority, what society considers minorities, people of color do not have power, institutional power. So there is no way that they can commit racism. Can it be prejudice? Absolutely. Can it even be racial prejudice? For instance, there's this long joke that's gone on. White people can't dance. You guys remember that?
Oh yeah, I know that shit's not true.
Right.
Okay. I get down. I'm just sorry. I'm cutting
right?
out. I'm just letting you guys
that
know.
statement right there is a racial prejudice. Right? There's a prejudice that they can't dance and based on being a white person. So that is racial prejudice. So people can experience if someone who is angry and whatever, they had a disagreement and say, hey, you honky, right? Or use a term like that. That can be a racial prejudice, but to say that that is racism is absolutely false. And I think that this is something we need to talk about, what racism really is and the privilege, right, that white folks have. Even if you're white and you were born into poverty, you still in life have some form of privilege that people of color don't have. And so I think we need to be very careful because in the end, we want to put an end to racism, right? And classism, and live in a world where, is fair and equal to everyone and comes from a space of love, right? It's important.
I'd say that may be number one.
Right. But we cannot start addressing this issue if we don't start using the proper language and understanding, right? It's really important that we understand because we tend to, spew these words and people feel angry and their feelings get hurt, right? And everyone's too busy bickering and no one actually gets a better understanding.
The biggest thing we talk about is breathing, but the other thing that you always heard since a baby is, well, some have, use your words. Use your words, right? I mean, just use your words. But then there's also a limited capacity of thinking for some people out there, which we, different varying degrees. And that comes into where we need some patience and to breathe because sometimes it takes a little longer to get that message across to somebody else. But
so I want to say thank you because it's like platforms like this are what allows, right? Because they don't really teach you this in school, right? And so as we have these conversations, it's really important. Platforms like yours that reach people on a different level, especially through social media, right? Because that's the society we live in. And so thank you.
Well, I thank you for having a great conversation with me. And actually, I mean, look, I've dealt with people for hundreds of thousands of people in my old career. And I never once thought of it. I haven't personally taken the time. I just haven't thought about it. Never got to that point. And even through all this time frame right now, we've talked about many times. What you said that night when we were talking, that day when we were talking, just hit me between the difference between prejudice and racism, because I've said, that multiple times, and that really made sense. I mean, but again, you have to understand the systemic aspect of what that truly means, and you can't really know that unless you know the core of, like Joe, your book, like the Color of Law, right? I mean, you got to understand the whole background and backbone of the Matrix and how that was created. Ernie, what do you think about that? What do you think? Thank you very much, by the way, Maisha. Appreciate that.
I of course agree with my dear sister there in a bunch of fashions. I've always felt like the discussion about racism, as opposed to that being, prejudice or what have you, has a lot of different elements to it. And I feel like what happens is whenever that discussion comes up, there's generally a societal belief, I think, for lack of a better terminology at the moment, that says, okay, well, what we're talking about is going to be determined by who is the most important in the conversation, right? And I think that that's why so much of the discussion about racism as opposed to prejudice gets hijacked, because we're taught, listen, people who are of a certain culture have the right to sort of own the conversation, right? Which is why things go, oh, well, I'm white and I've experienced racism. Okay, let me break that down to like a microcosmic kind of an idea. I was always taught that racism was the ability to exert influence on somebody else due to their race, right? Having power over that other person or that. Okay, if you want to tell me that 3 black kids were walking behind a white kid at, you know, on his way home from school, and they decided to beat up on him because he was white, you want to call that racism? Okay, I can somewhat give you that because those 3 kids had a position of power over that one kid. However, when you're talking about the broader discussion about racism, although that one kid's experience was terrible, it doesn't even compare to the idea of a whole structured society being put in place to say, okay, well, that person can't have a loan, therefore they can't have a house. That person can't walk away from this conversation because I'm now wearing this uniform and this police chief told me I have to harass people who look like you. Or having kids go from grade school all the way up through high school and be taught about George Washington and Christopher Columbus and never about Eldridge Cleaver or about anyone from Puerto Rico, anyone from Haiti. That's institutional racism that completely eclipses the idea of one-on-one situations. You see what I mean? So I think that what happens is like people attempt to go, well, listen, I'm a person of this country and we're not going to say it, but I happen to be the culture that is supposed to have the dominant say over this conversation. So if I say that I experienced racism, well, then that's obviously true because I experienced it. Not totally sure. And to be honest, at this point in time, the reason that we're fortunately able to have conversations like this is because that archetype, for lack of a better way to put it, meaning white male people with money, they can't control the narrative anymore. That's why all the hoopla is going on. And that's why conversations that are honest can finally start happening, because it's like, well, you can't control the narrative anymore because you never should have, where this topic is concerned. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
So I think that there is a difference between, you know, racism and racial prejudice, because, you know, if I'm gonna, all of us prejudge people we don't know. The prejudgment might be
stereotypical prejudice, right?
You know what I mean? The prejudgment might be good or bad, but when tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, you know, potentially millions over a 200-year period are all going, hey, listen, I'm kind of experiencing this type of situation and it's coming from this archetype, whether it be white male or what, you kind of lose the ability to go, oh, well, all of those people conspired to lie about the same thing and make the same claims about the same type of person. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, in that regard, that proves that racism is definitely a one-sided issue so far, anyway.
Well, it's kind of weird. Yeah. I mean, you know, the old terminology where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, there's a big ass, the world's on fire, and people are like, oh, it's not really happening. That's not real.
Exactly. Well, now that narrative doesn't have any legs to stand. Not that it ever did, but right now, especially because I think people can communicate with each other so quickly and with video and things of that nature, that now the narrative is shifting to the people who should have been listened to begin with. That's what we joke about here when I'm like, you know, 2016, I joke about that as the year that white folks realized that they should have been listening to their friends of color all along. You know what I mean? Because now all of us are like, you see? See what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? And now everybody else is like, oh, crap. Yeah.
I'm like, Ernie, you want to do a show? Joe, what do you think?
Well, you know, I always try to break down the layers of this and why the conversations are difficult, because racism is conscious hatred. That's a part of what racism is, but racism is more complex than just I hate you. And like the scene that Ernie said, you know, I hate somebody, so I'm going to go beat him up. That is part of it. Burning a cross in front of your lawn is another sign of what a part of racism is. But racism is about a system, right? It's a system of social and political pulleys that can control access or favor access for one group and deny access to another group. What's difficult when having these conversations with most people is that this was a system that was created that predates them. So they don't feel like, well, I didn't do anything. Nobody gave me a privilege card. When I was born as a white person, somebody didn't say, well, here's your privilege card. You earned this because you were born white, right? So when you speak about privilege, most, even good intentional white people, they can't even comprehend what the hell you're talking about because nobody ever gave them something. And this is where books like The Color of Law and all these books are so important. So you can understand how these systems were put into place years and years and years ago that still impact or gives your group, right, and a competitive advantage. And the tough thing in having conversations that I've had with white people in general is that when you are the dominant group, you don't see yourself as a group. You see yourself as individuals, right? I have my individual right. So when you say white as a group, they don't see themselves as this monolithic group. Now, the people who are oppressed, they see themselves as a monolithic group and they see white people as a monolithic group. And I'm like, we're not monolithic, right? Latinos are not. My father, there's generational differences. There's as much variance within groups than they are between groups. But I even get into arguments with Latinos and Blacks and who think that we're this monolithic group, that we all think the same, act the same, and have the same concerns. And I'm like, my parents are from another country that grew up in a dictatorship and very highly religious evangelicals. They're ultra conservatives. My parents would be more in line with Republicans in their train of thought. Not because they're racist, not because of all this other stuff, because they grew up in a dictatorship where things were black and white, you followed the law and all this kind of, that was their experience. Being born, first generation of being born in this country, totally different experience, right? Than my parents, and our generation is different. So even amongst Latinos, there's in-between group variances. And much of what I get into discussion on both ends is that the people who tend to be oppressed or on the lower rung of the hierarchy system feel that we all should come together and think the same and act the same. And if you don't, then the Uncle Toms and all this starts flying around because you don't fall in line. You don't have group thinking. Like I have to conform to the group and whatever the group thinks, from if they have 10 pillars of thoughts, I have to agree with all 10 of them. If not, I'm some kind of sellout, traitor kind of stuff to the cause. So when you're bringing in two separate experiences, the people that are more oppressed by the system and the people that are on the system that are taking advantage of it, we have to break down those understandings that where they're coming from may sometimes people then throw the word racism out and think they're being racist about it. But I just think they just don't have the understanding of the historical background to it. Now, whether they choose not to because they don't have to have the understanding because they inherited this privilege unbeknownst to them. It's not like like I said before, they went out and they get a privilege card when they were born. So they don't have a need to understand the system and how it affects other American citizens that are not in the privileged class. So they don't have a need. But I think just like you, Q, once you start having these conversations and you're willing to change your mind when evidence is presented to you, that is what we're missing in the society. People are steadfast in their beliefs, and no matter what information you give them, they're not changing their mind, especially people who are already in positions of power. Power doesn't concede to itself. It just won't. And that is, as I said before in our last show, that is a human condition. That is not a white phenomenon. It's not like Latinos, if they were in positions of power, would not act exactly the same. Because if we look at history, we acted
always the same. Always the same.
But we get caught up in the race thing, and we lose sight that this is just how humans react in hierarchy systems. And hierarchy systems is systems that all primates, and we being primates, fall into. This is how we've been for millions and millions of years. And I don't know any other system that we've been living in or develop our brain to be in, to function in, other than a hierarchy system. So you're going to have these problems. I hate to be a pessimist. No matter what, you're going to have these kind of issues between people on the upper rung of the ladders and people on the lower rung of the ladder.
Well, and the outcome is often the same, though, isn't it?
Yep.
When you have to, what do we say? Every civilization comes falling down, which is scary, right?
Yep.
If I may, may I interject really quick here? Because it kind of goes along with something that Brother Joe was saying there that I sort of wanted to add into there. I think right. that you know, there was a time frame in our history as people where we thought if you ate pork, you were going to hell. You know what I mean? We do evolve past things that don't make sense for us anymore. I think the more that we learn to be a little bit communal. But I wanted to toss something out, if I may. If we wanted to outline the idea of how privilege manifests itself, right? Because I think, Joe, you touched on that pretty good, I think, you know. So there was a metaphor or an analogy anyway that I wanted to ask. Privilege, think of it like this, right? If you notice that the royal we always gets used when it's something positive. Here's what I mean. When NASA supposedly went to the moon in '69,
supposedly,
when people talk about that, they go, "We did that. America did that," right? Or when, you know, an Olympic medalist, look how great we've done, right? We talk about, you know, anything that we could go down the laundry list of things where people go, "That's America," right? But as soon as you say, okay, but America also had people who owned slaves, everybody wants to be treated like an individual. They go, I don't know anything about slavery. I didn't have slaves. My parents didn't have slaves. Oh, wait. So let me get this straight. The royal we only exists for us when it's something positive. When it's something negative like racism, you don't want to be talked to like America. You want to be talked to like an individual. If that's not a perfect example of privilege, I don't know what is. Like, if that's not the perfect example of privilege, I don't know what is.
It's a great point.
That you have the privilege of going, I don't have to own the negative stuff. You don't have to, you know, I don't have to own the negative stuff. I can just slide right around that and own all the positive. That's a perfect example of privilege right there.
I think there's some people out there that, I don't know if it's that, if they could just acknowledge it. There's people out there that say like oh, it wasn't me. Like, look, I didn't own slaves personally, right? But I can understand the United States of America and how that went down. I mean, I'm aware of it, right? So I take ownership in understanding the system and the country as a whole. Now I know I personally, right?
Right, because we didn't go to the moon either.
Right. But you have to understand that it's it's real, it's there, like, right? You can't like push it away. And you're right, that's 100%. I mean, I think everybody's, or not everybody, there's a lot of people that won't look at it. I mean,
but I think that's just, again, getting back to, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth there. And I'm assuming that you're not saying that that's unique or a phenomena that you only find in one racial group and not in another. Like, that's not something that's dispersed amongst all of us, that we would take credit. We're quick to want the credits, but not the debts.
Yeah, right.
Who wants to take debts? Nobody wants to take upon somebody else's debt. I'll take upon somebody else's credit, but damn if I want to take upon anybody else's debt.
And that's a perfect example of privilege.
Yeah, right? But that's just, if you're in that position, it's easier for you to do that. But I just think, again, while having these conversations, because I've had, this privilege thing that people are like, well, they're going to give you their individual story, which was, my parents came from Italy and they had nothing and they worked bootstraps and picked themselves up and yada, 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 yada. And nobody gave me anything. We struggled. And here's Ernie or myself coming to say, well, you have white privilege. And they're like, where is it? Because we never saw it. So
Right.
The difficult thing is to try to break this down into different layers, which is, America, especially Western society, is about individual rights, right? And what we're talking about is group dynamics, right? That your group, even though you individually never had owned a slave or anybody, but as a group, and is how do we get people to understand that you have to take the debts, but most people do not want to take the debts that come with being part of a group.
Sure.
That's what goes back to you. Then they want to rush back into individualism because they're like, I personally didn't do anything about that, but the contract that we signed with America is that we have to take its credits and its debts. We don't get to decide where our taxes go. I don't get to say, well, I'm not a farmer in Kansas. I have nothing to do with that. I shouldn't pay. My taxes shouldn't go to that. I don't get to decide that. The government takes our taxes. Right, we should, but we don't. The government takes our taxes, and those taxes go out to where they decide to have it to. So a very complex issue to break down and get people to come to some kind of agreement on that we have to accept the totality of what America is, and we can't just cut the slice of the pie that we want that's convenient for us and not take the other side with it. And that's a very difficult thing for people to understand.
Okay, let's switch up gears and go in kind of in this same frame, and we'll kind of bring it back to, we're going to slide back into a couple other things. But
did we lose Maisha?
I don't, she's there, but she's just not on. I don't know if she's had to do something or, but
are you still there?
But she's on, she's just turned her video off and sound off for a second. Not sure.
Right.
I mean, she's still online.
Yeah.
Also, she wouldn't be there. She would have disappeared. So, but we'll just keep rolling here. But I just want to go into then. So we're talking about all of these things in history and going in the past. Let's talk about a statuesque aspect for a little bit. Okay. Now I want to start off with saying, I understand, in my opinion, I understand why a lot of this is going on. But I certainly have a viewpoint about life. And again, obviously, maybe it's from coming where I come from, but in my life in general, without the shit I've gone through, I would not be half the individual I am right now. I pay homage and I give myself honor for dealing and living through the stuff I've lived with to get to where I am in this life. And there's nothing I would change about my past. Okay. I don't know how I feel about tearing down statues as opposed to building up another one next to it. I don't know how I feel about, and this is, again, I'm saying this out loud because it's a thing I'm having. And then, you know, it goes even a little bit further. Now we can dive into this, but this is my side on this, right? I always felt like, I just feel like taking away one, now giving, or maybe the way it's glorified of certain things. And that's the problem with a lot of these, obviously, but there's aspects of things that I think we need to keep remembering no matter what. And that's not coming from being white. That's coming from being, let's not forget where we came from and how we got here. I don't care how horribly painful it is. I feel like sometimes you have to remember your past and really remember. But, you know, now we got some guys out there talking about taking down Jesus statues, right? Sean King, right? And we talked about that a little bit. I think that's too far. But I want to understand an angle on this because I've had a debate with this, and I'm wide open to being swayed into other thoughts. And I'm not a hard set, but I'm just looking at my own body, and I'm glad I went through shit to get here. And I don't want to forget anything that happened to get me here. Who wants to jump in? Ernie, you're chomping.
No, I could go. There's a million things I could say about this, but Maisha, what do you think about this? What do you think about this topic?
Does the Jesus statue or just like...
Well, just statues, the statues in general. Statues
right.
in general. I mean, I want to get a little more insight and I want to be...
So I think it's we must remember our past in order for history not to repeat itself. I believe in that. That's why it's important that we teach our children our past, everything, right? But unfortunately, society's been one-sided, but especially in this country.
Yes.
But
right.
This is the problem with the United States of America. There are too many statues, right? there are too many statues that are praising these people and not saying, well, this was the slave owner racist, right? This was the man who, slaughtered many
Right.
women of color. This was the
true history,
GYN doctor,
the
right?
true history of it.
And then when you think about it, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's a meme going around on social media that talks about exactly what you're saying and puts it in reverse. You don't see Jews in Germany, right, having Nazi figures of
Right.
Hitler all around, right? You don't tell them you have to leave those up and in order to remember your history. While they talk about it, they don't have statues, right?
They
Because
have stones in front of the house. They kept everything up there for reminder, though. I mean, they kept all the,
but
a lot of what's going on over there as reminders, right? I mean,
but it's not a reminder as far as praising, and it is not,
right.
or that other, there was another quote that they talked about, like, oh, I know, in fact, it works perfect, Jesus, right, and the church and Christianity, and how, yes, the devil played a role, right, if you're a Christian and you believe, right, but the church doesn't have, he played an important role in Christianity, but the church doesn't have statues of the devil. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Right? That's another meme that's going around, and it's so true. So, yeah, we got, and a lot of these statues overall, they're everywhere, right? In Fort Greene, Brooklyn, where I live at, there's one every few blocks. There's a statue or some plaque of some. And when you look it up, even as we walk down the streets, every damn street name, right, is named after a former white slave owner.
Or and the forts and some of the
right. And so some people just don't know who the hell these people even are. They've just been there, right? But if you do your research, no, they shouldn't be there. I mean, it's time that these statues and
so presidents, no Jefferson, no Jackson.
They're in the history books. Nobody's completely erasing them, right? But there's really no need. Columbus is one statue that needs to be taken down. Okay. You got Cuomo saying, "Oh, but he means so much to the Italians."
How long before we change our money?
Right.
I'm serious. I'm asking you. What do you guys think? How soon before this comes down?
Well,
if Trump loses, will that happen?
Here's my take on the whole statue stuff. I mean, the argument really started with the Confederate flag and the Confederate monuments. Is obviously the statues were put up post Reconstruction. Some even during the Civil Rights, as most of them as a sign, as basically a fuck you to people of color that wanted to get their rights. So, it's also obviously, the Confederacy is a traitorous organization or group that went against the U.S. Constitution. So their contribution to our society is not anything positive, as opposed to when we look at, obviously, Jefferson and some of our presidents. Yes, they owned slaves. Yes, they were very imperfect and flawless people, but you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. What Jefferson, his Declaration of Independence and other contributions he had to this country, and his brilliance as a man, but just like all men, we are flawed. So when we start to look at things, I always try to make it personal. My father was my hero, but my father did some piece of shit stuff. Yep. I'm just gonna call it what it is. Now, am I gonna throw my father out? Does he have to be perfect for me to make him my hero? And the answer is no. I'm a great person, and I've done some piece of shit stuff myself, that if we start to look at all our things and have to hold this up to this level of perfection, that only perfect people get statues, then I'm going to agree with Maisha, there won't be such a thing of a statue, because nobody will be able to land in this perfection that we're trying to look at. So I as far as the Confederate statue stuff, to me, that's a sign of traitor. And that's something that happened post Reconstruction and the Civil Rights era. So they just put that up as a big finger to everybody else. Other statues we had to take, and the Fort Braggs, Fort Hoods, and all that other kind of fort stuff. That to me is a no-brainer. You shouldn't be celebrating people that were actually against the country that we lost 700,000 people to. So all that is a no-brainer to me when it comes to Confederacy and the flag flying in any state capitol building or being on people's clothing or being allowed to be used. I think, like Maisha was saying, we don't have Nazi flags. They don't use it in Germany. Actually, it's against the law. You can't even have any paraphernalia that has any symbols of Nazism anywhere. You have to sell them. If you're going to sell the stuff, you have to sell it behind in a back room somewhere. You can't have it displayed or anything like that. They made that a conscious effort, and I think that was actually something that we should have done, years and years ago. But as far as looking at other statues, I'm not a throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think, like Maisha says, we can't deify these people, and that's the biggest problem. Like, I know my dad, maybe when I was 8, I thought he was a god, but as I grew older and I saw the shit he was doing and I had my mind of my own, I was like, well, goddamn, Dad was the kind of piece of shit. He did some badass shit that I don't agree with myself.
Okay, so
my dad. You know what I'm saying?
So given the okay, so go ahead, Ernie, go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on this.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
I love this particular topic. As far as statues are concerned, there are many brilliant uses for them, right? Like museums. Look, the fact of the matter is you can toss all of these statues into museums and anyone can go see them whenever they want to see them.
That was kind of what I was getting at too. We're throwing them down, breaking them down, and getting rid of them.
However, I will say this much. We could debate this till the cows come home, but the fact is that human beings work via symbolism. We always have, we do now. That's why so many people were so upset at Colin Kaepernick just kneeling at a flag. What's the big deal? It's a piece of cloth, right? It's not just a piece of cloth. That cloth represents people. When you think about these statues, like Joe said, many of those Confederate statues that are getting tossed down right now have been easy to come down. You know why? Because they weren't made with very good material. You know why? Because they were getting thrown up really quickly right as the civil rights era was happening and people were getting the right to vote. Those statues started going up all over the place. So the people who were putting those statues up were putting them up specifically to say, like he said, middle finger to you and your civil rights. Here is our leader, right? So Joe covered that well. So I won't go too much further into that. I will say this though. For the people who are feeling a certain type of way about those statues coming down, why the viewpoint on only the opposition? Here's what I mean by that. What you always hear them say is they're just statues, they're just meant for history. Okay, so then why are you so upset that they're up? If they don't mean that much, why are you so upset that they were up? I always ask the same question. For people who were, because I get this one a lot. As a person of color, whenever somebody who's conservative is debating me, they always want to toss Martin Luther King's name in, without ever really researching the whole of that speech, but that's a whole different Zoomcast, right? However, they always toss Martin Luther King up. And I'm like, how did you learn about him? Did you walk up on a statue? Or did you read about him somewhere? So see, history books do a way better job at teaching us about history than a statue does. So that's all I'll say about that, because we could go on with that for 3 hours. However, where the Christ symbol is concerned, this is what I say that. I know that this is a touchy subject. People's religious beliefs are what they are, and, have at it, whatever it is. I'm not even going to bring mine into it. I'll just say this much. Here's my issue with people being upset over the idea of bringing down the statue of a white Jesus. Here we're taught, right, that religion is supposed to be one of the bastions of spreading truth, right? Can we say that that's a fair assessment?
Okay.
That's what we're taught to believe about religion, right? Specifically Christianity, that this is where you go to find the truth. Okay, so are we, as we get upset about the idea of bringing down statues, here's my real question. So this is an organization that is dedicated to spreading the truth, but many of us have a discomfort with being truthful about what he even looked like. I mean, how does that make sense at all? Because see, it sounds to me like what Sean King was saying was not just bring the statues down and shatter them, but hey, if we're gonna put a statue of Jesus up, why not put one up that looked like what he actually looked like? And here's why I say that. Because, all right, I'll try to use a quick analogy and I won't be long. If I was adopted by somebody, by a married couple, if I was adopted by a married couple and never saw anything about my biological parents. Then I'm 16 years old. My biological parents decide they want to meet me. I sit down at a dinner table with them and I'm like, hey, how are you? Hey, you know, tell us what you're like as a person. I say, I don't know. I always kind of feel weird in my family because, you know, I always have these weird inclinations to want to move and I can't really explain them, like just these physical feelings in my body. And they go, oh, well, that's because you're a dancer. You come from a long line of dancers. Now I understand something different about myself that I was puzzled about. How does that relate to the statues of Jesus? If you're going to believe in Christianity and you're a person of color, when you see a symbol of a white Jesus, whether it was intended to be that way or not, you are being told every time you look at that symbol that your skin color is not close to godliness. So again, I bring it back to the original idea. If Christianity is supposed to be the purveyor of truth, why would anyone be upset at being truthful about what he even looked like?
Well, so what he looked like, though, Tenny, was Jewish, right? So,
and dark skinned and woolly hair. So for, you know, because I feel like if we really study the history of that, his image was changed,
right,
because the church was helping to actually, it was helping the slave trade, and it was bad business for them to be trading people that looked like the Messiah they were supposedly worshiping. Now that's a long topic, much longer than we have left in this Zoom, but that's the truth. So if we're going to embrace the truth, then why not embrace the whole thing, including what he looked like? I mean, it's not going to hurt, right?
Well, I mean, didn't a lot of cultures have it? I mean, there was Asian Jesus, there was Black Jesus, there was a bunch of people, like there's different paintings of people, like they changed the way depending on where Christianity was. Jesus' face changed. So at the same token, is it almost saying that he could be all of us and any of us at the same time, or was it to appease and try to pull people into that? I mean, that's a whole other, let's not dive too far into that, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. But if 200 years from now, we blew up the world and people still existed, we could have people then claiming that LeBron James was Asian. He wasn't.
I see what you're saying.
So why not just say what LeBron James actually was?
Okay.
But doesn't the Bible describe Jesus and the color of his skin? So it's kind of a no-brainer. I think statues overall, it's so funny because I'd have these conversations with my dad and he's like, look at these statues. He's like, almost always the statues are of some admiral, some military person, right? Historically. And what does that promote, right? When you think of the military, and I'm sorry, but military is war, right? War is violence, right? Imagine if we took down all statues and put up symbols of love and peace, right? And well, this country, the world, like, have we ever just thought about that aside from, because everything's, you know, all these generals and all these people, somehow we're involved in a damn war, right? Let's take them all down. Fuck it, excuse me, French, but and let's put up
outlaw statues.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Outlaw statues.
Yeah.
Outlaw public.
But let's put up symbolisms of peace, of love, of unity.
Right. No, I get you. Yeah.
You know, and then as far as the Jesus thing, I think in recent years, in recent times, most people know Jesus was not white, right? It's talked about
Right.
more freely now. I mean, you have churches, the Catholic Church that I grew up in, right? And it's a Catholic church in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and the Jesus they have up is a Black Jesus in a Catholic church. Okay, so I think we need to be honest with that. Jesus wasn't white, and it's okay that he wasn't white, you know, and so in some way I kind of agree. I mean, whether you believe in, I think,
So blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus needs to come down. I mean,
yeah, we have to be honest with if we go by the Bible, he was not blonde hair. I'm going by what I learned in the Bible. What I learned in the Bible in a Catholic school, Jesus' skin was not white. He didn't have blonde hair, and he didn't have blue eyes.
Can we do a little makeup job on the one that you got instead of ripping it down?
So then, I mean, if you want to save, just to recycle,
give it a little spray tan. I mean, something.
I guess for environmental purposes, maybe we can like.
Sorry to just.
Maybe paint would be better, you know.
But yeah, whatever. Sorry, guys. I'm just instead of ripping it down.
Yeah, my take on Jesus, or specifically Jesus, is again breaking down why Jesus, why it's important in America or in most of the places where Christianity was brought into, right? So when we look at the Americas, at the African continent, wherever imperialism went, it brought their white Jesus with them, because white supremacy was something that they had to bring in to help tame the savages. So there is a symbolic iconography about making Jesus white and not making him ethnically correct, right. Because none of the Abrahamic religions came from in Europe. They all came from the Middle East, and last time I checked, it's a very hot place where white skin doesn't do very well, right? So
yeah, I was out in the sun for 25 minutes today. I'm fried.
Right. So I get that, obviously, what you're saying, Q, that if he was painted, you're going to paint or describe people in the culture, that in the mainstream culture. So if Jesus was brought in China, I mean, we could say the same thing about Buddha. Buddha is Asian, but we also know Buddha was Black. But in China, he's gonna look like the people. You want people are gonna identify with people who look like them. That's just the bottom line. If you want to convince a group of people that this person came from whatever, it better look like me. You know,
that's a case. Period.
Period. Right. So I mean, the Catholicism did the same thing as it absorbed cultural norms or religious norms of other religions. It didn't totally throw them out. It absorbed some of it into Catholicism, and that's why we have 9,000 different saints, or why Catholicism has so many saints and stuff like that. Because it knows it has to leave something for the group to identify if you want them to assimilate to that religion.
Sure.
If you just try to give them somebody that doesn't look like them at all. Now, when it came to the United States, Christianity wasn't like everything else that chattel slavery brought. It wasn't by choice. It wasn't like you had any other choice. This was fed down to you, you know what I'm saying? And of course, white supremacy wouldn't allow a brown Jesus or an ethno-looking Jesus, because then you have people who'll be like, but wait a minute, you're selling me something that isn't true, and we couldn't have that kind of discussion. So there's a history that needs to be taught, but I'm not, and I think that it is important for people to know that obviously people from the Middle East tend not to be very fair-skinned people with blonde hair and blue eyes. It doesn't happen too often, okay? So I think that's a discussion we need to have, but am I saying we need to take all statues of Jesus down because he's blonde-haired and blue-eyed? I mean, that's not a battle that I think I'm willing to go fight against. I think we do need to speak that he would have been, that Abrahamic religions were all religions of people of color, and that people of color, the contribution to religion is great because most of the religions come from places of color. Very few that are still with us are from nations, from white nations at all.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think it's diving into religion and diving into, I think it's, for me, understanding, I just think it's a line that just a little too far to cross. I don't feel like that needed to be going down a route. I didn't feel like it needed to go down a route that way. So I think understanding the other aspects, but Jesus, Christianity, and that whole thing, I get the idea. I'm sure it certainly sparked a lot of conversation for those that are aware. I'm seeing some people that are like, why are we talking about Christianity? For those that there's a gentleman named Sean King that does this on Instagram and has a podcast that is very,
he's a social prophet. That's what his job is, to provoke.
That's what he does. If you guys ever get a chance to, I don't know, there's Andrew Schwerman.
Oh yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
He did a thing. Anyway, he's a comedian, but really great thing.
Yeah, he's funny.
So as we said kind of at the beginning, well, first of all, I think that was we went through a good amount of, I guess we only went through a couple topics, but God, we could sit on here for like 6 hours and talk about this, right?
Oh, wow, yeah.
If not, well, 6 years and still not, scratch the surface. Okay, so we want to try something different here. I think we've all got, do we all have Facebook open right now?
Yeah.
I wanted to see if anybody's got a question or something like this. Kind of calling it off to anybody out there making comments. Looking at Facebook right now, we're a couple seconds behind. If there's anything that anybody wants to say or ask a question, maybe we can dive in for like 15 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Just waiting. I'm checking. Okay. All right. No, just comments look like we're going back and forth. Anybody? Quick question? They're waiting for me because we're on a 20-second delay. So we'll give it 1 second. But, I think, next week, something that we're talking about, and just to understand the workings of the United States, I would like to discuss a little bit more of Puerto Rico and understanding, and I know how that works, but I think it's important to start seeing, not for reasons of like hate but just to see the true workings of like how our country works. And again, we talked about things like just understanding the laws and its nature for a lot of people that don't want to dig in, but understanding how like Puerto Rico's handled and the little differences and nuances between the states. And I know there's obviously that's been a topic of conversation. Now it's not necessarily, Black Lives Matter, but there's a certain thing that needs to be talked about a little bit, I think, right? Would you not agree there, Maisha?
Oh yeah. We're talking about the United States and their history of colonization.
Right.
So whether it be Puerto Rico or other parts of the Virgin Islands, right? So it's definitely a conversation, and that we can say colonization, even in what it has done with indigenous people here in this country, the Native Americans, when we talk about the African slaves that were brought over. So it's all connected, and I really think I would love to hear more about this topic, because it's important we know our history, and also because we can talk about, with this comes up some like internalized racism, right? And internalized oppression. So I think these are conversations that need to be had, even with our own folks, with other people of color. So as you guys see, Joe's got this awesome book.
That's just good. That's what I was pointing at right now. What's it called, Joe? Hold on, let me.
Called War Against All Puerto Rican. It's written by a great guy, Nelson A. Dennis. He's a lawyer that went and did a lot of intensive research, got some of the declassified FBI files on what they were doing in Puerto Rico, and gives you a really, really good understanding of the laws, because since he's a lawyer, a lot of the laws that were passed from the United States to Puerto Rico through the governorships that they put in place in Puerto Rico. So it gives you a good idea. If you want to know what's going on in Puerto Rico today, you have to go way back and find out how this whole thing started in the first place. And if there's a book I recommend, Color of Law will be one. If you want to know about current day politics in Puerto Rico and why it's in the situation it is now, this would be definitely a book to pick up. Hopefully we could get David Galarza on here. He knows Dennis as well, and maybe he could even get Dennis on this podcast. That'd be great as well. and he could give us a really rich history of some of the laws you passed. As I told you before, I think most people don't know history, and because it's history, so they think they don't need to know it. But I think I'm a little internal optimist in this way. I think that most people in general are just uninformed or misinformed. And once they get the information, and these are laws, most of the books that I'll present are scholarly works. So this is not like just somebody's opinion. These are scholarly works that once you find out what was done, you're going to be in shock. You'll have another, and again, I'm not going to throw the baby out the bathwater. I don't think we need to tear down America and throw it away. It's the greatest social experiment that human beings have ever taken upon to try to get multi-ethnic, multiracial people to consider themselves one group, which is just against our human nature to even think about. So I just think we just need to have a better historical perspective on the good as well as the not so good that we've done. And I think that's the richness that just provides richness to this. Like I told you before, I try to make it personal, and I'm like, as great as my dad did, I know he did a lot of great things for a lot of great people, but that wouldn't be half the man he is. There's another side of him that didn't do a lot of great things, and that is who he is. And I have to love him despite his flaws.
Sure.
And we have to love America despite her flaws.
Sure.
But we have to hold her to her flaws. And I think that's been one of the things that America hasn't done.
Well, she's got to hold herself to the flaws.
Correct.
Right.
And we have to hold her to her flaws too.
Yeah, right.
We have to let people know that there has been a lot of flaws, and those flaws have been disproportionately given to people of color. That's just how it is.
I would agree with that, man. Like in a way, you know, when we think of our own parents and say, okay, well, they were flawed human beings, we're dealing with 1 to 2 people. When we talk about a country that probably was responsible for the genocide of over 400 million, you might have a few people that have some diverting feelings about that, brother. In terms of glorifying them anyway, or keeping a snapshot of them like on a horse, you know what I mean, in bronze, when, you know what I mean, they hated people that were colored bronze. I don't know. A lot of people might have issue with that.
Sure. Well, they definitely do.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, but
it's not like a mind-up. There's no question there.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. My thing is that, you know, those same people that look at statues are buying Nike sneakers.
Right.
Yeah. If you go down that rabbit hole of people have to be moral, perfect human beings, we will be done as a society, because you're not going to find these people. It doesn't exist.
Well, they're buying Nikes. They're buying Nikes and they're listening to rock and roll. So, right. I mean,
right. You know, that should be a topic one day. Rock and roll should be a topic.
No, that's going to be the theatrical side. But I mean, there was something I was saying that, oh gosh, what did I see? Oh God, if people cared as much about, oh God, what was it? It had something to do with if they loved black culture or black people as much as they loved black culture, we'd be something like that. We'd be something around those lines. I saw something, right? Dude, it was brilliant, right? And it's really interesting how that is probably one of the biggest telltales of everything here. It's really interesting to me. So listen, we were going to try to do some questions. It seems to be more of conversation, which is cool going on these things. I think, you guys, I want to get some last words for this evening. I know it went really, really fast. Maisha, since you're first to go, last thoughts. Next week. So keep that in mind.
As I'm sitting here, first of all, it was an honor to sit and chat with you guys. It's so funny because some of the topics bringing up things for me. So you mentioned, you know, Joe, about folks calling to tear down statues, but at the same time are purchasing Nike sneakers, right? That's another issue, right? And that's capitalism. And we can go deep with capitalism that goes hand in hand with racism. And I think one thing at one step at a time. And so I don't know, that statement kind of, you know what? I now that America, the United States of America, let's be specific, the United States of America, yes. You know, we need to throw out the garbage. We need to tear it inside out, right? And expose all of this filth. And you know what? I'm not going to apologize for being angry. I'm not going to apologize, and no one should for wanting to tear shit up, right? Because this country was built on violence, right? Um, People are fed up. There's in these protests, there's no amount of violence being committed in these protests that there was when it came to building this country. You cannot compare that. People are angry, people are fed up. I applaud it. It is time that no, tear it all down, tear the whole fucking system down, right? And let's rebuild because believe it or not, we still love our country. Those people that are tired, right? Which include specifically Black Americans, right? And other people of color and people who are just fed up, other human beings that are fed up, does not mean that they don't love their country. This is their country. And so, yes, we, now that I'm really thinking about it, we got to tear the whole damn system apart, right? It's time to clean house. So kudos to those. And we need to, if we feel in a certain way about it, then we need to look within ourselves and ask ourselves why. Why am I getting offended, right? We all, none of us are perfect. I can learn. We can all take, it's important that we all learn um, our history and the history of this country and dig deep on why we feel a certain way, why emotions. So this is what I'm going to leave whoever's watching. Like, nah, it's time for change. We can't continue to putting band-aids, you know? So I'm hearing these things and these feelings are coming up, and kudos to those that are out there who are saying enough is enough. It is time for change. And when we address systematic racism and oppression, right, that's when we're also going to address um, income inequality and looking at decisions that people are making that have, like Joe said, $200 sneakers. Sneakers shouldn't cost $200, period, right? So
That's $20 to make overseas.
you know, so that's something else we need to, but it needs to start from somewhere. So I guess I'm a little fired up right now, and I'm just saying kudos to tearing shit down.
All right, so this is your homework. You got some homework. You're gonna be getting this down. You're gonna have an op-ed for us, but next week when you come on, we're gonna have you dialed in. That's fantastic. I appreciate the fire and understand it. And I look forward to diving into understanding more. I mean, our conversation, if people get, when they start diving into what we talked about last week, it's pretty amazing. So, it's horrible, but it's amazing what you told me. So I look forward to that. And thank you very much.
Yo, Q. What's up? Maisha just gave me a new campaign slogan.
Oh my gosh.
Make Kit Kats 10 cents again. That's my new campaign slogan right there. If I ever run for office.
Kit Kats, that's your
$200 sneakers is ridiculous. Let's go back to the era when Kit Kats was 10 cents.
Right. 10 cents Kit Kats is ridiculous. I mean, that brings you back to like Halloween. I don't know, man. 10 cents instead of candy. I don't know if anybody had that ever happen. You used to get money instead of, forget it. Anyway.
It's a start.
Yeah, like 10 cents when it was a lot of money. Go ahead. Ernie, what do you got?
Nothing, man. Look, after what Maisha said, how do I follow that? You don't.
We do it next week.
She said it all. You know what I mean? So I appreciate her words, and I'm just gonna say, you know what? Ashe, dear sister.
Fantastic. Joe?
I will implore people to read. I mean, you have a smartphone, it's right on your phone. So there's no more, I don't know, I didn't know. At this point, it's been overdue. You just don't want to know. And I think, although I believe that most people are just uninformed, and I think conversations like this that bring up, even showing these type of books or bringing up or citing a reference to a book or to a study hopefully will get people to want to go do their own research. You know, normally what I tell them is like, hey, don't believe me either. You have to be skeptical about all the information that comes down the way, because I could be BSing you too. You know what I'm saying? So go get it yourself and go read it, and go read it yourself and do your own research, and then become a critical thinker. I'm a product of the United States and Western society, so I am very much into individual rights versus group thought. And that's the way I look at things. And you'll see on this show that people are like, I'm going to disagree with Maisha on things, and I'm going to disagree with Ernie on other things, because I just think as an individual, although I understand, I have a pretty good understanding of the history of oppressed people and also the history of people in dominant positions. But I just, like I told you, when we spoke before, I come from a human perspective, and I look at human beings, and this is just how human beings react to certain situations. And we just so happen to be in a country that the dominant group is white, and they're going to behave as the dominant group. And I'm with Maisha. I think not only people of color are sick and tired. I mean, but we've been dealing with sick and tired for a long, long time. But even in class differences, right? There are a lot of poor white people who are sick and damn tired, right? There's a whole coal mining in Kentucky and Western Virginia that their jobs are never going to come back, and their job skills are not transferable. And 10 years from now, they're going to be sick and tired of being sick and tired as well. So hopefully the people on the classism will rise up, and people of common interest in class will say enough is enough with the people that, the 1% that are killing everybody and making out like bandits. And we do have to reform the system to make it more equitable, or as best equitable as it could possibly be, that people could earn an honest living, like Maisha said, and raise a family and look forward to something in life other than, working for nothing and just being exploited. So I think on that point, that's what I like to end with.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much. My biggest thing, I think, is, ignorance is no longer bliss. I think I've said this before. Ignorance is a choice now at this point. I mean, it's you can't say, well, I didn't know anymore. It's not. There's like he's exactly right. There's too many ways to really find the truth. If you really wanted to find the truth out there's many ways. And I'm not talking about Instagram stories or, that's
memes.
Or memes, right? But listen, another great talk. Really enjoyed having you all on here again. Maisha, great addition. Look forward to next week. We'll figure out how we're going to finalize that and get that dialed in. But thank you all for watching as well as get the book.
I get that book every week. Every Monday there'll be a new book. I got hundreds of them.
Love it. Well, you guys, thank you very much. Everybody get some rest. Go to sleep. Read, whatever you're going to do. We'll see you all next week. Thank you for joining us on Mondays. Don't forget comedy on Thursday for those that want to laugh and change this up again. Throwdown Thursday, 8 p.m. my time, Pacific time. Patrick, Nay, and I with a couple comedians. You guys will love it. It's fun.
All right.
Anyway. All right, guys. Have a great night.
Peace, y'all.